We live in a world that celebrates loudness, confidence, participation. We ask children to raise their hands, speak clearly, make friends easily. Yet some children slowly grow quieter. Their laughter becomes measured. Their voices soften. Their presence begins to shrink. And here is the question that lingers beneath concerned glances and parent-teacher meetings. How does a child who once spoke freely begin to fear being seen? It's easy to assume they were always shy, sensitive, just born that way. But that's not the full picture. Beneath the surface, there's an entire psychology unfolding, a quiet adaptation, a nervous system learning something about the world. See, for some children, social anxiety doesn't begin as fear. It begins as awareness. An awareness that the room is watching, that tone matters, that mistakes echo longer than they should. It begins the moment they realize they can be evaluated. And once that realization lands, something shifts. You notice it in small ways first. They rehearse what they're going to say before raising their hand. They study other children before joining a game. They laugh a second later than everyone else, making sure it's the right moment. They scan faces for micro-expressions: approval, confusion, rejection. You see them hesitate at the classroom door. You see them cling just a little longer before walking into birthday parties. You see them retreat into books, into imagination, into corners of safety. From the outside, it looks like timidity. From the inside, it feels like vigilance. Psychologists have found something fascinating about early social development. Around a certain age, children become acutely aware of how others perceive them. It's the birth of self-consciousness, the moment the mirror moves from the wall into the mind. And for some nervous systems, that mirror doesn't just reflect, it magnifies. A simple mistake becomes a story. A laugh from across the room becomes evidence. A teacher's correction becomes identity. The brain, still forming, begins wiring around the possibility of social threat. Not because the world is cruel, but because the child is perceptive. It's not about being weak. It's about being finely tuned. Some children feel everything: the shift in tone, the subtle exclusion, the way attention changes when they speak. Their nervous systems register social information, sensitive instruments, picking up frequencies others don't notice. And when you're built that way, a classroom isn't just a room. It's data, constant, unfiltered, overwhelming data. So the child adapts. They speak less, they observe more. They learn that invisibility can feel safer than exposure. And maybe that's not cowardice, maybe it's intelligence. But social anxiety rarely appears out of nowhere. For some, it begins with a moment, a laugh that lasted too long, a presentation that didn't go well, a friendship that shifted suddenly. For others, it's more subtle, a slow accumulation of small social injuries that no one else noticed. A teasing comment, a comparison, a raised eyebrow. Children don't have language for humiliation, they only have sensation. A hot face, a racing heart, a wish to disappear. And here is what is often misunderstood. The child isn't just afraid of people. They're afraid of becoming the wrong version of themselves in front of people. They begin managing impressions before they even know what impression management is. They edit their words. They soften their opinions. They shrink their enthusiasm if it feels too loud. This is self-presentational pressure, but in miniature form. It's the strain of shaping yourself to avoid rejection. Over time, the child learns something powerful and dangerous. If I am less visible, I am less vulnerable. And that strategy works. At first, teachers describe them as well-behaved. Adults call them mature. They don't cause trouble. They don't demand attention. They become easy to overlook. But inside, the cost accumulates, because when you constantly monitor how you're being perceived, you lose contact with how you actually feel. The internal question shifts from "what do I want to say?" to "what will keep me safe?" That shift is small, But it changes everything, because let's be honest, even childhood has its hierarchies: popularity, charisma, social fluency. We pretend children are innocent of status games, but they learn quickly who is admired and who is ignored. In a culture that rewards extroversion, raising your hand, speaking confidently, performing competence, the quiet child can feel like a misfit in a system designed for louder nervous systems. So they internalize the difference. And here's the paradox: the more they try not to be judged, the more they judge themselves. Every silence becomes proof. Every hesitation becomes flaw. Social anxiety is not just fear of others. It is hyper-awareness of the self. And that awareness can feel relentless. So let me ask you something. When was the first time you became aware that other people were watching you? Not just seeing you, watching you. And what did that awareness change? But not every socially anxious child is driven only by fear. Here's the complexity. Some are responding to real unpredictability, inconsistent reactions, environments where affection felt conditional. For them, vigilance isn't irrational, it's learned. And others are simply deeply empathetic. They feel others' emotions as if they were their own. A tense room tightens their chest. A disappointed glance lingers for hours. Their anxiety isn't only about being judged. It's about not wanting to disrupt harmony. And here's the deeper philosophical undertone. In a world that constantly says, "Be yourself," we rarely talk about how terrifying that can feel. Because to be yourself is to risk rejection. To speak freely is to reveal something that can be evaluated. So the child begins to split. There is the outer self, the careful one, and the inner self, the vibrant, imaginative, unfiltered one that only appears in safe spaces. And the longer this split exists, the more unfamiliar the outer world feels. This is where the paradox lies. Social environments are meant to create belonging. Yet for some children, they become places of fragmentation. Designed for connection, they can quietly cultivate isolation. And over time, the anxious child grows. They become the teenager who overthinks every text message, the adult who replays conversations at night, the person who longs for connection but fears exposure. But something else happens too. The longer someone lives with social anxiety, the more they develop depth. They become observant, reflective, attuned. They understand nuance because they've studied it for survival. Colors feel brighter in solitude. Imagination grows richer. Inner dialogue becomes complex and textured. They learn to be alone without being empty. And yet, the ache for ease remains. Because humans are wired for connection, even the quiet ones. Research shows that socially anxious individuals often have heightened activity in the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, when anticipating social evaluation. Their nervous systems prepare for danger, even in neutral settings. It's not dramatics, it's biology. Studies also suggest that highly sensitive children process social stimuli more deeply, more intensely, which means more memory, more reflection, more rumination. In simple terms, their brains don't skim social experiences, they absorb them, and protecting themselves becomes regulation, not weakness. Sometimes the very child who withdraws is the one thinking the most, feeling the most, imagining the most, but their silence is misread. They're labeled shy, fragile, lacking confidence. Yet their silence isn't emptiness, it's processing. Maybe that's what quiet strength looks like in childhood. Not boldness, not dominance, but the ability to endure inner storms without collapsing. There's something sacred about a child's inner world. The fantasies, the secret thoughts, the private questions. When social anxiety develops, part of that sacred space becomes guarded. Not because the child has nothing to offer, but because what they have feels too precious to risk misunderstanding. Maybe that's the hidden story. They're not avoiding connection, they're protecting authenticity. So if this feels familiar, if you recognize yourself in that quiet child, maybe there is nothing fundamentally broken in you. Maybe your nervous system learned early to pay attention. Maybe you became careful because you were perceptive. Maybe the anxiety wasn't a flaw, but a strategy, a young mind trying to stay safe in a world that felt unpredictable. That doesn't mean the fear is easy, or that it doesn't hurt. It does. But pain and intelligence can coexist. Sensitivity and strength can share the same body. So let's return to the question. How does a child who once spoke freely begin to fear being seen? Maybe it happens the moment awareness outruns reassurance, the moment perception outpaces safety, the moment they realize they can be evaluated but don't yet know they are still worthy. And maybe healing begins not by forcing that child to speak louder, but by helping them feel safer being heard. Because being anxious doesn't mean being incapable, being quiet doesn't mean being empty. And the child who became socially anxious may still carry the same imagination, the same curiosity, the same depth they always had. It's just waiting for a room that feels gentle enough. In the end, social anxiety is not the story of a child who was too weak for the world. It may simply be the story of a child who felt the world too deeply. And sometimes, the most courageous thing that child can do is slowly, softly, begin to be seen again.